Welcome back to my channel. In today's lesson, I'm going to show you how to solve quadratic equations by factoring using a four-step procedure. Now, to do this, you are going to need to use your knowledge on how to factor polynomials. Now, for those that need help on factoring, I do have videos on factoring on my channel. So let's take a look at the first example here. We have 2x squared minus 2x is 24. This is a quadratic equation because of the 2x squared. So we're going to solve this quadratic equations by factoring, and we have a four-step procedure of how to do that. So let's go ahead and take a look at step 1. Now step 1 is to move all terms to one side and set the equals to 0. So if you look here, you got 24 on this side, which is not a 0. So we're going to have to set this equals to 0. To do that, you would have to minus 24, because when you minus 24 to this, it's going to come out to 0. So we're going to move the 24 from right to left by minusing 24. So it's going to look like this. 2x squared, take away 2x. So when you minus 24 here, you're going to get negative 24 on the left-hand side of the equal sign. And then you get 0 on the right-hand side of the equal sign. Okay, so that's step 1. Now step 2 is we have to factor this trinomial. Okay, you can see that 2 is the greatest common factor because 2 can go into 2. And then 2 can go into 2 here, and then 2 can also go into 24. So you can pull out a 2 to make it easier to factor. So we're going to pull a 2 out. So when you pull a 2 out, you're left with x squared minus 1x. And then here, 2 goes into 24 12 times. And then equals to 0. Okay, so we pull out the 2, and 2 happens to be one of the factor. And now we're going to have to factor this trinomial into 2 binomials. So 2. Okay, let's try this out. Okay, so what do you need to multiply to get x squared here? So you're going to need an x times an x, because x times x is x squared. And then you're going to need a positive number and a negative number, because positive times negative is negative. So basically here you have to come up with two numbers. Now when you multiply, it comes out to negative 12. But when you add those two numbers, it comes out to negative 1, what b is. All right, can you think of those two numbers? Well, let's try, if you thought of positive 3 and negative 4, you are correct, because positive 3 times negative 4 is negative 12, and then positive 3 plus negative 4 is negative 1. Okay, so those two numbers worked out. All right, so these are your three factors. So we're able to factor this. And that is step 2. Step 3 is to set each factor equals to 0 and then solve for x. All right, let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to have to set 2 equals to 0. So 2 equals to 0. Well, that is going to be false because 2 does not equals to 0. So that one's no good. And then you have the other one, x plus 3 equals to 0. Okay, that's that factor. And then the last factor is x minus 4 equals to 0. Okay, so when we solve this, we minus 3 to get the x by itself. So x is 3. And then when we solve x minus 4 is 0, we add 4 to get the x by itself. So we have x is 4. Alright, so these are the two answers for the equations above. Okay, so that's step 3. And then step 4 is the last thing we have to do. Now step 4 here is you write your answer as a solution set. So we're going to write this as a solution set. So that's going to look like this. X is, okay, one of the solutions is 3 and then the other one's 4. All right. And that is how you solve quadratic equations by factoring. And this is an easy one to factor. So let's take a look at another example here. We have 30 equals to 3x squared minus 13x. Okay, we're going to solve for x. And we have a 4-step procedure of how to do that. So we're going to take a look at step 1. Now step 1 is to move all terms to one side and set the equals to 0. So if you look at the equation, it's not equals to 0. Okay, so what we have to do is set it equals to 0 by getting rid of the negative 30. So how do we get rid of this negative 30? Well, as you can see, it's not equals to 0 because you have 30 on this side. So we can make this side equals to 0. And how do we do that? Well, to make this go away or to make it come out to 0 is to minus 30 to it. So we minus 30 to this side, we're going to get 0. And then here we have 3x squared. Take away 13x. And then minus 30. Okay. Now we get this negative 30 by minusing 30 on this side. Okay. So basically what we did is we moved the 30 from left and then put it on the right side. Okay, so that's step number 1. Now step 2 is to factor. Okay, so we have to factor this trinomial. Now you look at the coefficients. I mean, you're not going to be able to pull a 3 out because 3 cannot go into 13. So there is no greatest common factor besides a 1. Okay, so we're going to have to factor the trinomial. And we're going to go ahead and use the slip and slide method to do that. Okay, so to factor this using the slip and slide method. First thing we need to do is take the a times c. So we're going to take 3 times negative 30. So your AC, so that's a times c is negative 90. Okay, so we have to come up with the two numbers that when you multiply, you get negative 90. But when you add those two numbers, those two factors, it comes out to b. So here's your b, is negative 13. Okay, so let's go ahead and think about those two numbers. A times c, two numbers multiplied to get negative 90. Then when you add those two numbers, it comes out to negative 13. Now it has to do with a positive and a negative numbers. Okay, so let's try 18 and 5. Okay, it's close to it, 18 and 5, but one of these has to be a negative numbers. It just makes sense that this is a negative 18. So look, you got negative 18 times 5 is negative 90. And then negative 18 plus 5 is negative 13. Okay, so these are the two numbers that we're looking for. Okay, once you have those two numbers, you're going to use those two numbers and you are going to write it in factor form. So it's going to look like this. So you have 0 is, okay, here you have x minus 18. And then the other one is x plus 5. Okay, so we have x minus 18 here because of the negative 18. And then we have x plus 5 here because of the positive 5. So after you do that, you are going to divide these numbers, because here we multiply by 3, right? To make this comes out to x squared. So we do the opposite. So we're going to have to divide by 3 to get it back. So we divide this by 3, and then we divide this by 3. Okay, so now continue. We're going to have x minus 6. Okay, now it's x minus 6 because 3 goes into 18 6 times. And then on this side, for this factor, 3 cannot go into 5 exactly. So what's going to happen to the 3 is that it's going to come to the front. Okay, so it's going to be the coefficient for x. So the factors is going to be 3x and then plus 5. Okay, so these are the two factors of 3x squared minus 13x minus 30. Okay, so that's step 2. Now step 3, okay, we're going to move this up a little bit so we have more space to write. Step 3 is to set each factor equals to 0 and then solve for it. So we have two factors. Okay, so we're going to set x minus 6 equals to 0, and then or 3x plus 5 equals to 0. Okay, so that's step 3, and then we're going to solve for x. So here to solve for x, you add 6. So when you add 6, you get x equals to 6. So here you get x equals to 6. Now over here, to solve for x, you have to minus 5 and then divide by 3. So when you take away 5, you get negative 5, and then you divide that by 3. Okay, so these are the two answers. Okay, so that's step 3. We solve for x. Okay, and then last thing we have to do, step 4, is to write your answer, write these answer as a solution set. So we have to put this in a solution set. So it's going to be x equals to positive 6 and then negative 5 over 3. Okay, so those are the answer in a solution set. All right, and that's how you solve quadratic equations by factoring. Okay, let's take a look at another one. So here we have ax squared minus 2x is 15. And we're going to solve this quadratic equations by factoring. We have a 4-step procedure of how to do that. So let's go ahead and take a look at step number 1. So step 1 is to move all terms to one side and set the equals to 0. Okay, so we want to make this side equals to 0. And you can easily do that by take away 15, because 15 take away 15 is 0. So here you have ax squared, okay, minus 2x. And then if you minus 15 on the right, you get a minus 15 on the left-hand side of the equal sign. And that's how we got the minus 15 there. And then you have 0 on the other side. Okay, so that's the first thing you have to do. Now, sometimes you're getting equations where you have equals to 0 already. Okay, so if you have a case like that, you don't have to do step number 1. Okay, but if you don't, you got to set it equals to 0. All right, let's bring in step 2. Okay, step 2 is we have to factor. Okay, we got to factor this trinomial. Looks like you're not going to be able to pull anything out because 2 cannot go into 15. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and factor this using the slip and slide method like we did with the second example. So here you have a times negative 15, so that's a times c. So when you take a times c, you get negative 120, so that's going to come out to negative 120. Okay, so now you have to come up with two numbers that when you multiply, you get negative 120. But when you add those two numbers, it comes out to what b is, and then b is negative 2. All right, so let's go ahead and think about those two numbers. How about we use something like 10 and 12? Okay, 12 and then 10. And then one of these, okay, has to be a negative number. So how about we try negative 12 and then we test it out. All right, let's see. Negative 12 times positive 10 is negative 120. So that's good. So that works out. And then negative 12 plus positive 10 is negative 2. So these two numbers are the two factors that we're looking for to make it true. All right, so what do we do next? Well, we have to write it out as factor form. So here you have x minus 12. Okay, it's minus 12 because of the negative 12. And then x plus 10. Okay, so it's from these two numbers. So now, you guys remember what we did here? We multiplied by 8. We took 8 times 15, negative 15. Well, here to bring it back, we're going to have to divide by 8 because that's the opposite. So we divide negative 12 by 8 and then we divide 10 by 8. Okay? Looks like 8 cannot go into 12 exactly, but you're going to have to reduce it. Okay, we can reduce it by 4. 4 is your greatest common factor, so we get 3 over 2. Okay, and then over here, break it up by 2. 2 goes into 10, and then 2 goes into 8. And you end up with 5 over 4. All right, and then that whole thing equals to 0. All right, so it looks like here 2 cannot go into 3, so the 2 is going to come to the front of x. So we have 2x minus 3. That's one of the factor, right? 2x minus 3. So here you have 2x minus 3. All right, what's the other factor? Well, the other factor is going to be 4x plus 5. All right, so those are your two factors. Okay, so step 2, what we did is we factor. All right, let's move on to step 3. All right, so step 3 is to set each factor equals to 0 and then solve for it. So here we have 2x minus 3 as one of the factors, so we're going to have to set that equals to 0. So 2x minus 3 is 0. And then the other one is 4x plus 5. All right, so now we're going to solve for it. Okay, so to solve this, to find out what x is, you add 3, then divide by 2. So what happened when you add 3, divide by 2, you get 3 over 2. All right, and then over here you take away 5 because you're trying to get the x by itself. So you take away 5 and then you divide by 4. So what do you get when you do that? Well, you get negative 5 because you minus 5 and then you divide by 4. All right, so x is 3 over 2 or negative 5 over 4. All right, so that is step number 3. And then last thing we have to do is write the answer as a solution set. So x is 3 over 2. And then the other one is negative 5 over 4. All right, so those are your two answers. All right, and that's how you solve quadratic equations by factoring. Okay, so let's take a look at another one. So here we have 12x squared minus 29x is 8. And we are going to solve this by factoring. This is a quadratic equation. We're going to solve it by factoring. And we have a 4-step procedure of how to do that. So let's take a look at step 1. All right, step 1 is to move all terms to one side and then set the equals to 0. So that's easy. We know how to do that. We did that with the last two examples. So we're going to minus 8, right? So we're going to bring the 8 over, right? So we're going to have 12x squared, take away 29x, and then minus 8, and then 0 on the other side. Because you minus 8, you get 0. All right, that's easy. Step 1. Okay, so what's step 2? What do we do for step 2, you guys? All right, if you say factor, you are correct. So step 2, we are going to factor this. Okay, looks like we're not going to be able to pull anything out because 8 cannot go into 29, so not pull anything out. So we're going to go ahead and factor this like we did with the last 2 examples using the slip and slide method. So we're going to take A is 12, and we're going to take that times negative 8. So what is it? What's A times C? So here we have AC is going to be negative 96, right? 12 times negative 8. So now we have to come up with 2 numbers that when we multiply, we get negative 96. But when we add those 2 numbers, we get what B is, negative 29. All right, so let's think about those 2 factors. All right, so hopefully you can come up with those 2 numbers, right? Looks like it's gonna be negative, or it's gonna be 32 and 3, right? That's gonna give you 96. It's gonna be negative 32, right? Because you need to multiply to get negative 96, and then when you add those 2 numbers, comes out to negative 29. So this looks good. All right, so these are the 2 numbers you have to come up with, okay, to be able to keep on going. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna use those 2 numbers and we're gonna write it in factor form. So x minus 32. Okay, what's the other one? Well, if you say x plus 3, you are correct. All right, you guys remember what we did before? Here we multiply by 12, right? So to get it back, we have to divide by 12. So we got to divide this by 12, and then we got to divide this by 12. Okay, so don't forget all that equals to 0. Okay, we ran out of space here. Okay, so let's keep on going. Okay, what do we do after this? After we divide by 12? Well, let's see. Can 12 go into 32 exactly? No, 36 would be, yeah, but not 32. So we can go ahead and break this down by 4. So if we reduce it by 4, we get x equals 8 over 3. Okay. And then here, by 3, so it's going to be x plus 1 over 4. Okay, so we reduce it, and then that equals to 0. Alright, looks like 3 cannot go into 8 exactly, and then 4 cannot go into 1. So what's going to happen is the 3 is going to come to the front. So what do we have? We have 3x minus 8. Okay, so that's one of the factor. And then what's the other factor? Tell me, what's the other factor? Well, if you say 4x plus 1, you are correct. Good job. And then that equals to 0. Alright, so that's step 2. Okay, what do we do for step 3? What do we do after this? Alright, so we have to set it equals to 0. We have to set each factor equals to 0. And then we have to solve for x. So here we have 3x minus 8 equals to 0. And then over here we have 4x plus 1 equals to 0. And then we solve this one by adding 8, divide by 3. So we get positive 8 over 3. And then this one, we minus 1 divided by 4. So what is that? Well, that is negative 1 over 4. Alright, so those are the two values for x. Alright, what do we do at the end? What's step 4? What do we do now? We write the answer as a solution set. So we got the two answers here. So that's going to be x is, okay, a over 3. And then the other one is negative 1 over 4. Alright, so these are your two answers, solving for x. And that is how you solve quadratic equations by factoring. Now, if you don't know how to factor, it's going to be impossible to solve this by factoring. There's other ways that you can solve it, and I'm going to make more videos on how to solve this using different methods. So thank you for watching, and I hope this helped. All right, see you guys next time. Thank you.